Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar with regards to classing fire-affected wool clips. My name is Megan Rogers, and I'm the manager of Sheep Connect New South Wales. We're joined today by Fiona Raleigh, AWEX Registrar, who's going to talk to us about the practicalities of classing clips that are impacted by fire. And I guess, firstly, I just wanted to, acknowledge and send our thoughts out to all those who have been affected by the fires in recent times. I know that the nation's thoughts are with people that are fire affected. So just wanted to offer our best wishes, I guess, for those for a recovery and hoping that some rain's falling over those fire grounds and that the rain's falling gently if possible. Fiona, maybe somebody that you already know, is the AWEX Registrar. And has been with AWEX for 4 years and previously as a wool classer and wool classer trainer, and is based regionally in Cootamundra, New South Wales. I'll hand over to you now, Fiona, and offer you a warm welcome.
Thank you, Megan. It's great to be here and have this opportunity to contribute what AWEX can at this point in time. This is something that we're not really, we don't have guidelines for in the Code of Practice. So we've put our heads together and come up with something to help. That request came from some selling agents who have some clients that have fire-affected sheep that will be shorn shortly, and we were just looking for some guidelines about the preparation of the wool. So that's how this all started off for us, was to try and provide some tips, some classing tips to build on what classes already know. So I hope that's going to be helpful for all. The tips that we put on our Facebook page certainly were well received and appreciated. So we're just going to build on that. Thanks, Megan. So we've, as all our guidelines in the Code of Practice, we create guidelines based around our customers' needs. So I know that we've got growers in the audience, and it's the growers that are directly affected. AWEX is that conduit in between the processor and the grower. So if we prepare the wool to meet what our customer needs, then we're going to optimise the wool that the growers are presenting to sale to the best advantage. So that's something that we've got to think about. Though I know it's a really sensitive time, and growers, we don't want to put growers under tremendous pressure either. So let's just get through this, I think, is what we're looking at. So we had a look at what potential, and I say potential because there's been no fire-affected wool come onto the market yet. So everything we're looking at is, what we're expecting to see. And we have 3 potential issues. Now, these wool faults could be burnt fibres, so there's actual damage to the fibre itself. There may be some singeing, which we're expecting to appear more as a discoloration, maybe a ginger appearance to the tip. And then we've got charcoal affected wool with no damage to the fibres at all. So obviously, as with any classing situation, we may have one or all of these situations present within a mob or within fleeces between sheep. So these aren't 3 separate issues. These are 3 issues that may be all encountered at once, but they still have to be considered as 3 separate issues because I think there's 3 separate potential faults that we have here for processors. So with any processing issue that's inherent in wool that we class for, we look at 3 different things. We look at, will the wool be discoloured? Will there be fibre loss or due to damage to the fibre? And our third one that we're actually not sure about yet is there potential contamination? So we're just thinking that maybe the keratin of the wool being damaged might act like a skin piece. This is just, we don't know. This is something we actually don't know yet. So discoloration and fibre loss are our 2 issues that we're thinking that our processors may encounter from fire-affected wool. I think something that's really important to note is that what we've found out so far is that charcoal affected wool is fully scourable. we believe. So that's a really positive thing. So if sheep have been running on burnt country, we really hope, we want classes to recognise that wool is, has no damage to the actual fibres themselves. So within a mob, we might have these three categories: the unaffected wool, the burnt and singed wool, and the charcoal affected wool, and they are three technical differences that we need to have a look at. So is that clear so far?
Sure is.
What we're looking. Okay, very good. So when we're looking at any technical fault within wool, we just like to apply our classing principles. So for any classes that are listening or any communication we have with wool classes, I think the important thing we need to reassure them is, and to reassure our growers, is that if we apply what we've learnt in our training of wool classes, if we apply those strategies from the code of practice, the principles and the mob concepts, it should get us through. So it should hold us in good stead for how to prepare that wool. So the first question I think that class are coming in to prepare a grower's clip would be to find out, as in any situation, what is the history of that mob. So we're looking at, have these sheep themselves been in direct contact with fire, which is going to indicate some fibre damage, or have they just been running on burnt ground? Because that will give two distinct different preparation strategies, knowing that just the charcoal is scourable, there's going to be a lesser processing issue as opposed to fibre damage being in contact with fire. So just our general good housekeeping principles that we apply when we prepare for shearing is to find out the history of the mob. So I think that's really important for classes to remember that. Sorry, I'm just jumping around here a little bit. The other thing when we're looking at the mob is we have to get an idea about whether the whole mob is going to be affected. So has the whole mob had the same contact, or has the grower actually put those sheep together and boxed them up for management reasons? So we may have sheep being presented that have all different faults within one mob. So the classer might have to be prepared for that. I think the grower also has to be aware that, that's going to mean an increase in the number of lines that the classer may be presented with in the shed, and just that space allocation in the shed for that, we're going to have more than the normal lines perhaps, especially if the sheep are being boxed up and all running together. The other important thing is for the classes to look at the possibility of salvaging unaffected wool if possible. Now, when we're looking at the mob concept for classing, that is that all sheep have been run under the same conditions and had the same environmental impact. If that's not the case, then there may be an opportunity for the wool classes to separate those unaffected sections of fleeces or unaffected individual fleeces out of an affected mob. I guess from AWEX's perspective, the message we really want to send out here is not to over fragment the clip. We don't want to create small lines unnecessarily just because we can see these differences. So that's where the classer really needs to apply their good classing strategies about what can I make the most of here to advantage the grower in unaffected wool. How much charcoal affected wool I have here, knowing that the charcoal is the lesser of the faults, and what wool is really damaged and we have to keep separate. Now, if the classer only has a small amount of those, affected wool, that can be added to a bulk class bale. So, I think the whole code of practice and classing is based around volumes of wool and what you're being presented with, which is going to be the difficulty, I think, is that classes are going to have potentially lots more smaller lines of different characteristics. So does that make sense?
Yep.
So the grower can assist the classer by presenting those sheep in order of mobs based on the level of exposure. So I would be thinking that if we had mobs of sheep that were unaffected, present those first. Then if we've got sheep that are charcoal affected, being the lesser of the faults, present those next. And our last sheep to be presented would possibly be those that have had direct contact with fire. But of course, we have to take into account, sheep welfare overrides all of those decisions. So, growers need to do what they need to do. It may not be possible to draft off sheep and have them presented in 3 distinct mobs, but if possible, that would be an ideal situation, as it would be for any classing situation. I think it's also important to know that even though we've got this affected wool, we don't need to describe it with anything other than our normal bale description. So we don't need to use the words coloured or black. This is standard classing descriptions, 3 AM for our main line of. Definitely don't use black. I think I've had some situations in the past where we've had, small areas of burnt ground where classes have identified the wool as being black, which it is obviously visually, but we want to reserve the words black, particularly for pigmented wool, because that's obviously not scarable, whereas charcoal affected wool is, we believe, definitely scarable. So there's not going to be a processing issue. The other thing I think about the charcoal affected wool is this could be ongoing. I know that sheep do have that sort of natural instinct to rub against burnt trees and stumps. So I don't think that this will be something we can see ongoing for quite a while yet, is the charcoal affected. So I guess my message to classes is that it's okay. Charcoal affected wool is okay. The other important thing that we really need to be mindful of is, and we've been asked by our selling agents, by our brokers, and also by our buyers about this, is that if we have unaffected wool, it's clearly identified in our documentation from affected wool. So we want that not in the bale description itself, but in the document that goes to the broker. We want to be able to identify those lines that have been affected by the charcoal or burnt and singed. So that's important for those to be well identified, but doesn't need to be identified in the bale description. The other thing is AWEX has already got in place ways of appraising and auditing lines of wool at sale that we're going to identify as being fire affected. We already have those descriptions in place. So that wool will be at sale from visual inspection identified in that way. So that's something good to know as well, that we've already got those strategies in place. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at the moment, but I think that the other really important thing I want to say to classes and growers is to communicate and for wool classes to remain flexible. Not to go in with any preconceived idea of how they may approach this, but just know those technical differences between the fire damaged wool, the charcoal affected wool, and being able to salvage any unaffected wool. That's all they need to know, because the rest of it will be just wait and see what they're presented with. So that's my advice as best we can. So how's that?
Fiona, that's excellent advice. I'm really happy to have heard that. I guess your final point where you talked about the communication, I've written throughout the course of your presentation what the key messages to me are, and the first one to me was communication between grower, classer, and broker. And all of the people that are involved in that supply chain. From the farm to when it gets down to the sale, and to communicate nice and early. I've also put there, now's and when people are shearing, if they have been fire affected and they've got ones which are burnt, singed, and a lot of charcoal affected, that it's quite possibly going to be quite a stressful time for all people involved as well. So in terms of communication, I've sort of taken away from what you've said that communication's key, and it's just really important to try and look for the best best outcome for you know, the livestock, and their welfare is really important, but also the quality of the clip coming through to maximise return for the grower. I've also taken a note there that the presentation, the order of the sheep that they come in, you can certainly get some free kicks there. The description, the importance of you know, not going with the BLK for the pigmented wool unless it's pigmented, and that burnt and charcoal affected isn't necessarily pigmented. And again, the documentation and making sure that your documentation is nice and clear, so that the buyers can see that nice and clearly. I've just had our first question come through, but I've also sent everybody a little message, and I'm not sure if you've received it. The message is just saying if you'd like to ask your question in person, verbally, I can unmute the people. If you can pop your hand up, so that's clicking on the hand in your control panel. George has just sent through one now. How heavy is charcoal, and how will it yield in comparison to other dust types? That's a really good question, Georgia. Thank you.
Well, all I can assume is that, just from my science background, is that it would have a similar effect as clay, which would be that it's going to sit up on the tip. That would be my guess. And again, this is all a guess, but charcoal just being a very fine, you know, a fine particle, not like sand that's going to sink down to the skin. So we do see those distinct differences in dust types, whereas a heavy sand will travel to the skin of a sheep, and a clay will sit up on the tip. I'm assuming it will sit up on the tip, and I think it will probably have a yield effect, but similar to that of a clay type.
Excellent. Thanks, George, for your question. Thanks, Fiona. Okay, I've got one from Ali. Thanks for your questions. It's nice. Keep them coming. How is the fire-affected wool identified in a catalogue for sale?
If the AWEX ID description is applied to the catalogue, and not all growers will, not all selling agents will print the AWEX ID. Some catalogues are printed with and some are printed without. The buyers definitely have the AWEX ID printed on their catalogue, but the public doesn't always. We'll have the standard comment of burnt, which we already have, and the other comment may be char for charcoal affected. So we'll have those two different comments, and again, they're distinctly different characteristics. So within the AWEX ID type, but may not be printed in the public catalogue. So yeah, so classes and growers may not be aware of it, just depending on who the selling agent is.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Ali, for that question. I guess here we go. We've just got another one. I was going to say I'll just have a bit of a chat for a second. So Sue Ellen has asked, what is your process to collate feedback from classes agents and provide this feedback across the industry as learnings for the future?
AWEX collects information on every single type and every single lot of wool that's sold through the auction system, completely documented and collected. So we'll be able to, using those AWEX ID type descriptions that we apply, to build up a profile of the Australian clip that has those types applied to them, which is hence the whole reason why we have an AWEX ID typing system. So any fault that is applied into the type, we can pull out that data to identify that wool. So yep, we'd be able to apply charcoal affected to numbers of lots sold with the characteristic charcoal identified in the AWEX ID type. So that will be collected. Is that answering the question?
I think it is. Sue Ellen might like to make another comment there in the question pane, if she's happy with that. It seems to me that there's a nice process of documentation there that's working, that we can utilise to create that information sort of yeah. One thing that I've got a question, Fiona, is just if in doubt, where should people sort of go to in the first instance?
Look, selling agent. And I guess, yep, growers can contact the selling agent, of course. You know, that they're their go-to for marketing, marketing strategies, how to best, you know, advantage their clip for sale. Technical information, yep, call me. No worries at all. That's fine. Can contact AWEX for any technical information. But as far as marketing and strategies, knowing the best time to put your wool on the market, those sorts of things, communication from buyers, that can come directly through their broker. So that the broker does really provide those services to growers. Classes can come to AWEX for any contact on technical information.
Perfect. Okay, and Sue Ellen said, yes, thank you, that question was answered well. And will the learnings then come into the training courses of up-and-coming wool classes?
Look, there's every reason to think that this possibly may be a new entry in the code of practice. You know, we don't have it at the moment, so it may, for next code of practice, which is under review this year and will be released in October 21 for the 22-24 version. We may have notes in there that speaks about just what we've done today about putting this together, these guidelines for preparing burnt and charcoal affected wool. So yes, there's every possibility it may become a code of practice entry. Of course, once something's a code of practice entry, then it becomes part of the wool classing training.
Excellent. Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Sue Ellen, for those questions. I haven't got any more there. Sue Ellen just said thanks, Fiona.
No problem.
Look, was there anything else that you wanted to add to what you've already covered already, Fiona?
Oh, look, I think that, you know, what I've seen from our Facebook post, classes have really appreciated the information. It's probably one of our most positive posts, and unfortunately about one of our most tragic, you know, topics. Whereas I really feel that classes will be going out there with an attitude of how can we best, you know, advantage the grower in the classing of this wool. So I think it's, you know, if there can be positives that come out of tragedy, I think really this is one that we're all going to work together to make the best of a bad situation.
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, you know, hopefully we can, you know, allay some fears with regards to how to you know, prepare that clip for sale. Sarah's just sent a question in. And her question is, when should I recommend producers to shear their sheep post-fire? Should they be shearing to remove all damaged wool if heavily damaged down to the skin in some areas, or can I recommend they wait to reduce the stress on them if suffering from smoke inhalation that may impact on their ability to cope with handling for shearing?
Yeah, look, I think when you think about wool harvesting, if we're just looking at wool harvesting, whenever we have a fault with wool, you know, if we can remove that fault, we're going to advantage the new wool growth. Absolutely. Not having any experience with this before, I don't know. I guess it's for vets to make those decisions. But you know, if you have a break in the wool due to illness or lambing or something, obviously when you shear, first available opportunity to shear that fault out, like a break in, like, you know, tender wool, is an advantage. I'm assuming that, you know, the wool, these sheep are going to have a great setback. There's going to be, you know, possibly even wool lifting from the skin of these affected sheep. I'm just guessing this. However, I think sheep management, obviously, sheep welfare has to override everything. Absolutely, you know, especially with our numbers the way they are. Just look after what you've got. That's all I can say, because it's really out of my expertise again. But yeah, for the wool harvesting, get damaged wool off. For the sheep welfare, yeah, definitely priority.
Yeah, I think you've answered that question really well, Fiona. Certainly the first and foremost question is, you know, if you've got animals that are severely impacted, is that veterinary interventions required to ascertain, you know, the pathway forward for them. So, you know, a veterinarian really needs to be consulted with animals that are severely impacted. And look, I think that's all. If there's no further questions, I'll give you another couple of minutes to, or you know, a few more, just a little while to ask any more questions. The questions have been really good and really practical, and I guess the key messages for me are, you know, communication is really important. there can be some, you know, minimal impacts, particularly if it's charcoal affected. You know, the burnt singe is a different story, and I guess the key message is communication, and if in doubt, ask and seek some information. In closing, I just wanted to thank Fiona for her excellent presentation today. It's a very specific topic, and something that, you know, as I said, wasn't a huge topic, wasn't going to take us a long time to get through, but I think importantly, it's great to have your presence today to cover off on that information. The recording from this webinar will go on our website, and as I said, via our social media channels. It's being made freely available to AWEX as well. They can put it on their social media channels and website, etc., etc. So if in doubt, you know, find some more information about the topic, and as Fiona said, technical questions can go be directed to Fiona. And yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody for their presence today. You know, we haven't had a huge crowd today, but nonetheless, it's really important that that we're able to get this information out in a timely fashion. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. We know everybody's quite busy, and you know, there's plenty of people still busy on fire affected country. In the survey, there's a question there for future topics on how you've and how you found today. And as I said, the recording will be online and emailed to attendees and those who've registered for the webinar. So without further ado, thanks again, Fiona, for your attendance today. Thanks everybody
It was great, thank you.
Thanks everybody for tuning in, and yeah, I'd just like to wish everybody a good afternoon, and all the best with working through the fire affected grounds and fire affected livestock. Thanks everybody.